Councilmember Cundiff,
Here?
Councilmember Garcia,
Here.
Councilmember Manley,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cervantes, Mayor Molina.
Yeah, please. Please stand, place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I apologize. Okay, so I'll entertain an approval for the agenda, please. And a second.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. First, I'd like to thank Will and Celeste for improving the city's budget mechanism and improving transparency. Excellent work. Approximately 2 years ago, during budget review, it was pointed out that 4th Street Park and the Summerwinds Park were not being treated equally. The budget contained general funds for security cameras for 4th Street Park, currently budgeted at $6,200. No funds were provided for security at the Summerwinds Park. Since then, the Summerwinds Park has experienced bullying, the tearing down of signs, and turning over of lighting. Staff reports that vandalism have cost the city approximately $15,000. I understand the staff is looking to place security cameras in the park. However, security cameras are not clearly stated in the budget for Summerwinds. There are ample funds in both Summerwinds Community Facilities District Fund and the unreserved fund balance of approximately $3.1 million to pay for such cameras. I hope the city can quickly resolve this inequity. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Okay, so we'll move on to workshop item number 1, joint review of the fiscal year 2025-26 budget for the city of Calimesa and the successor agency to the Calimesa Redevelopment Agency.
All right, I will kick it off here. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm pleased to present the draft of the fiscal year 26 budget for the city of Calimesa. The internal process for the budget started in December. Although, I mean, the budget's really a year-round process with monitoring of the budget and doing forecasting and whatnot. But the formal process of putting the budget together began in December, focusing first on the capital budget, which was presented to the council back in March in the workshop. And then Celeste and I met last week with the Finance Committee to talk about the budget and go a little bit more in depth. I'm pleased to report that we are presenting a structurally balanced budget in the general fund for fiscal year 26 as of now, subject to any further changes in discussion that we're going to have today. And there's one other major item that is outstanding, which I will mention later. But we do have challenges ahead in the future fiscal years with rising costs and a lot of uncertainty in the geopolitical world, and so it does make forecasting that much more difficult. As you'll see when we talk about sales tax, we're much more sensitive to economic upturns and downturns and price volatility based on our sales tax mix. But for fiscal year 26, though, we're looking pretty solid. So for today's presentation, I'm going to talk about some accomplishments, and then Celeste is going to get into the fiscal year 24-25 budget where we are at today, as well as and Celeste and I will both kind of tag team on the fiscal year 25-26 items. Then we're going to talk about some of these future considerations and some of those challenges that we are going to be facing in future fiscal years. And then finally, we will do a discussion and get direction from the council. But as you have, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to stop me to answer or to go in more in depth. Because this is a discussion, it's not just a presentation. So just keep that in mind. So looking at our accomplishments for the current fiscal year, our Sheriff's Department has done a great job, and as a result, we have seen a significant decrease in Part 1 crime, down 17%. As Captain Northrup talks about in his updates, they've been doing lots of quality of life sweeps, and Officer Hinkle or Deputy Hinkle is very active in our community, and his presence is definitely felt. The Mountain View Park expansion is well underway. The restroom, the prefab restroom, was delivered and installed recently, and grading on the pickleball courts is ongoing. We've had upgrades in our fire equipment technology. We had our state and federal local hazard mitigation plan, which was grant funded. Lots of community events. You see some of those listed right here. Our public works staff and our office staff has done a great job in putting these events together. A lot of creativity, so definitely appreciate all their efforts. We went live with our licensing and permitting software with OpenGov, and we've seen a lot of efficiencies already gained from this software platform. It makes it a lot easier to track permits throughout the process. Our social media outreach with our social media workshop and training has really taken our social media outreach to the next level, and we believe that was a big part of why we've had, like I said, successful events in getting the word out. We implemented our new user fee schedule, and we are going to be recommending a CPI increase coming up here soon to keep up with costs. We want to make sure that our fees keep up with costs. We did get our housing element certified, which was a big deal. Thank you for the planning team for your hard work on that. And as you're going to see, we don't have much time to rest on that one, because in fiscal year 27, we're going to be starting the process all over again, because it's an 8-year cycle. And with the state coming down on a lot of the housing rules and regulations, HCD is really invested in what we're referring to as the housing police. So, they've had these rules in place for quite a long time, but they've been adding to them a lot in the last few years. And as a result, enforcement is going way up on actually, housing elements having an updated housing element has not been a new thing. But what is new is the hard enforcement on that. Our new library is almost complete. We're really excited about that. The grand opening will be in July, so mark your calendars. Is the date official? July 19th will be the grand opening. It's a Saturday, so we invite the council and the public. There'll be more information sent to you on that, but just make a note of that date. We recently completed the second phase of our pavement management program. Still cleaning up a few areas. There's a few punch list items that we're still out there taking care of, but we do have some new additional paving out there. And as you've seen, just coming in the senior center, the renovation is ongoing with our senior center restrooms. That is close to complete as well, and much needed, because these were pretty much the original bathrooms from this building. It was opened in 1988. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Celeste to talk about the current fiscal year.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all here. Thank you, staff, for being in attendance. I'm going to start with the fiscal year 24-25 general fund update. These are some tentative numbers as we're looking for. We just wanted to provide an update for this year that we're in. If we start off at the top, we look at beginning fund balance of about 8.6 million. We do have projected a net change in fund balance of a negative 154,000. The city still remains in a structural surplus. This is a consequence and result of one-time items that have occurred throughout this fiscal year. We've had some changes and increases in our legal budget and our attorney fees of about 169,000 for ongoing litigation. Let me get my notes here. Usually I'm pretty good about memorizing things. We had some higher than anticipated fire department overtime costs. We had additional expenditures of about $45,000 for the senior center food program. There was the $40,000 that was approved in the late fall, and then the additional $5,000 that was approved most recently to augment at-home seniors with their food. So altogether it's about $45,000. That was not an originally budgeted item, although it is one time. And we also had traditionally, and you're going to see increases in insurance budgets, and election costs were a little higher than we expected. So all told, a lot of these are one-time expenditures, but we are coming in at a negative 154,000. So we're going to end up with about a $7.4 million big projected ending fund balance for the start of the fiscal year that we're budgeting for. Any questions about this fiscal year? Okay, so I did mention that these numbers are tentative. I'm going to be really fine-tuning them this week. We do have some variables with legal, fire overtime costs, the police and law enforcement fees. There was an increase in fiscal year 25. We're going to do some number crunching there. And engineering professional services had an uptick from what we had originally anticipated. So while we have some numbers that are a little higher, we have some savings in other areas, so I'm going to be fine-tuning. So these won't be the exact numbers that you see when we come for final presentation in June, but I'll be making a presentation at that time. So just want to let you know these are somewhat tentative at this time. I'll know by the end of this week. So for the fiscal year 25-26 general fund budget, here is a summary. The ongoing column represents a net structural surplus, which we are pretty focused on maintaining and keeping consistent for the city of Calimesa. We have a net change of about $83,000. You can see that's a pretty tight variable with our almost $3 million operating expenditures to have an $83,000 budget. And with the variables that I've talked about, there could be a one-time incident. I mean, one of the reasons why our fire department overtime costs have increased, there are several reasons, but one of them, of course, when Los Angeles was on fire, you can probably speak to Chief at the time, I'm sure you recall, but there was a mention at the time that, hey, we need to staff up and be available here. So we can know and expect that there are variables throughout the year, but as it stands right now, we have about an $83,000 structural surplus for fiscal year 26. Our one-time elements, we have estimated revenues. We have about $375,000 that's been transferred from our public services CFD. The difference from 468 of 375 is the determination of a ratio of our interest income that we've considered to be one-time. Will and I did some analysis going back for 20 years because we know that we're living in a high interest rate environment right now, so we really wanted to be prudent and cautious and not rely on interest earnings. I think you've heard me talk about this before. I don't want to belabor it, but so we've done some analysis and analytics. So that's the split. We split out what we thought was due to a higher interest rate environment versus more steady and consistent rates that we can expect. The proposed expenditures, we have $350,000 in one-time expenditures, and I have a slide for that. So overall, we have an operating surplus of $246,000. We have transfers out of $900,000, and this is primarily as a consequence of the decisions that were made with respect to the capital budget workshop. And some of this also ties into the new fiscal reserve policy that was established back in September of 2024 this year that goes into effect July 1, 2025. And we are estimating to have an ending fund balance of $6.7 million, subject to variability and changes, but that's where we're at now. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to Will, and he's going to do a run-through of our revenues for fiscal year '26.
So when you break down our revenues, it comes clear that a majority of our revenue comes from two sources: property tax and sales tax. And even though it looks like three, the reality is that when you look at the red piece of the pie, which is property tax in lieu of VLF, that is also related to property tax, which is the main amount, was of 4.8 million. So 76% of our revenue comes from property and sales tax. When you add in charges to services, excuse me, the majority of that particular figure is charges for CFD1, which is our public services CFD. That was formed in 2006, and all new development annexes into that CFD to pay for additional services related to police, fire, and parks. Those are the three main areas that CFD can fund. So, for example, the POP officer is paid for with that funding. That, and the ongoing amount there is about $900,000. We have an additional one-time allocation from that fund, but the main allocation is $900,000 a year approximately. So when you add that in, it's actually 84% of our total revenue and 88% of our ongoing revenue. So that's the vast majority of our revenue. So let's focus in a little bit on property tax. This is a slide that I've showed before, but I think we only see this stuff once a year. I wanted to just show it to you again. This breakdown. By the way, we're starting our project to replace these mics, so just so you know. Thank you, sir. This breakdown is different for every city and can vary greatly. If you were to look at Beaumont, look at Banning, their breakdown will look much different than ours. The thing that usually most of them have in common is that the school districts are the largest part of the property tax dollar. And this is where the state kind of has, even though property tax is a purely local revenue, it's derived from the county that it's collected in, and it's used in the county that it's collected in. But the way that the state can have influence on that was part of Prop 13, which passed in 1978, did kind of dictate how, it did give the legislature authority of how that money would be distributed. So it was largely formed then with AB 8 and other legislation that came out shortly after Prop 13. But the bottom line is that over time, up until 2004, when there was a proposition that kind of prevented this thing going forward, is that keep in mind that the state, there's guaranteed funding for schools, and so the way that the state can manipulate property taxes is the more property tax that goes to schools, the less the state has obligation to pay. So they can use their authority under that to try to make sure that they have that distribution. So that's why on the very right side of there you see something called ERAF, and that's where the motor vehicle in lieu comes from. Cities used to collect vehicle license fees. They don't collect them, but they got that apportionment from the state. 2004, the state made a swap, a dollar for dollar swap, where they would get the VLF because they were trying to. Remember that was where there was a lot of talk about the VLF fees with Governor Schwarzenegger when he came into office, or at least around that time. And that's where they said, okay, we're going to take your VLF, but we're going to give you additional property tax that we've taken away from you over the years, because those ERAF shifts were basically city revenues that they took and gave to schools. So now they're going to start giving it back to you in the form of this, but then they took the VLF from us. Might be my phone. Yeah, no, it's probably my phone. Thank you. That's probably what it was. So anyway, that's where our property tax in lieu of VLF comes from. Now it grows at the rate of property tax rather than VLF, so it actually has benefited us in the long run. but that's basically how we get our property tax. So we have 9% of what's our general tax, 20% for the fire district, which was basically used to fund fire services prior to our incorporation, and then when we got incorporated, we just inherited that revenue, and then we get the motor vehicle and boom. So looking at the trend over the last 10 years or so, you see lots of growth throughout the 2010s, and that was the development of Singleton Heights, JP Ranch, and the first phase of Summerwind. From fiscal year 17 to 23, the average growth was 12% a year, but then from 23 to 26, that slowed to about 3.8% per year. Now remember, growth in property tax is largely capped by Prop 13. It's capped at 2%. So growth beyond the 2% is usually derived from changes in assessed values from property sales. So when someone buys a new property, the assessed value is reset at that sales price. Now there's some exceptions to that. For example, there were propositions passed that allow for people 55 and over to transfer their assessed value from their previous home to a new home, as long as that new home has a lesser value. So, you know, if they bought a house in 1980, let's say, in the LA area, maybe their assessed value is only $200,000. They sell their house in LA for $1 million, buy one here for $600,000, let's say, their assessed value is going to be $200,000 because they got to bring that assessed value with them. So that is an exception to that. But for the most part, when the house sells, the value resets. So that actually has led to, you know, this being more, because we have not had any development in the last couple of years. So as a result, that's where our growth is coming from. It's coming from the 2% adjustment for Prop 13 plus changes in assessed value from sales. Now looking at sales tax, this is what all cities look like pretty much. Now this is very uniform. The 1% is based on a 1955 law, the Bradley-Burns sales tax that was passed in 1955. Obviously, if cities have their own add-on sales tax, that would be added to this. But this is, if you don't have your own add-on sales tax and you're what is called a self-help transportation county, which we are because we have Measure A, this is what your distribution is going to look like. Looking at our major categories, one thing that stands out on the left side is which is the City of Calamasa's breakdown for major industry group, and on the right side is kind of a cumulative look at State of California, very balanced, which would be expected because it's a large number of you know, it's basically taking all cities into combined. 55% of our sales tax is derived from fuel and restaurants. And so this is largely linked to our location along a major interstate. We're a stop off for people to stop and get gas and eat. So we do have an outsized amount of of sales tax that comes in from those two categories. Consumption, but for gas prices in particular, there's been a slow decline. They kind of peaked in 2022, and they've slowly been declining. Obviously, we're still higher than a lot of the nation is, but if you look at where the gas prices were in 2022, that was kind of the peak, and it's kind of backed off since then. Combine that with consumption has been on a downward trend due to fuel efficiency standards. That's been an ongoing thing. We've seen fuel consumption trends dropping over a long period of time, but then what's accelerated that over the last few years is the people switch to electric vehicles, which don't use obviously any electricity or any fuel. So as a result, you see so if I go to the next slide, you'll see that our trend was again driven by growth in the early part of there. From fiscal year 2017 to 23, we saw a 15% per year growth. You see it kind of lulled there in the first couple of years. Obviously, COVID had an impact on that, but then it really sprang up over the 2-year period. That has to do with the marketplace and Summerwind. The Stater Brothers down in Summerwind is what's driven that. But since then, since 23 to 26, the average growth is about 1.2%. So as you're going to see, you know, we've talked about rising costs, and you see our revenue trends are starting to kind of slow down a little bit. our costs have not. You know, our major costs have been increasing. So you can see where that does present a challenge for us, which is why I said that things are looking good for this year. But again, you just have to be cautious about going forward, because we're not sure with the geopolitical stuff that's happening and a lot of uncertainty with tariffs and all that kind of thing. What is that going to do to prices in the long run, or even in the short run for that matter? So it does make revenue forecasting a little bit more difficult. That's something that, you know, I think Celeste and I have done a good job of tracking so far. I think our predictions come in pretty darn close. But these additional factors that we add on do add to a lot. It does kind of grow that little the min-max, so to speak, when you look at the forecasting. So something to keep an eye on as we go forward. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Celeste. She's going to talk about expenditures.
Thank you. Thank you, Will, for that. So looking at the general fund expenditures, we've come to this traditional pie chart, and the two bright spots, if you will, we have the blue and the red indicating police and fire. The collective, we have about 62% of our budget on public safety altogether. So that is fairly consistent. We're going to be doing a lot of comparisons back to fiscal year 21. It's a good touch point for people. It was right after the pandemic, so we're going to be showing some other trend lines. But back in fiscal year 21, the police and fire commitment of the total budget was about 59%. So it's staying within a range. So it's about 3% higher for this fiscal year that we're budgeting. And then we have the remainder of administration, and the rest of the city is about 38%. I did want to mention with respect to police that we do have to keep in mind that we do have a supplemental law enforcement fund that covers the CSO position and a portion of our POP officer position, and that's an additional $221,000. It's a special revenue fund. So in the collective, we spend about $3.1 million on police. Okay. So did you have any questions about this? Anything come to mind? Okay. And this is a chart that we presented new last year that we decided to stay consistent with, because it's a reminder that a city government is primarily responsible for providing services, and services are primarily provided through staff, through professional services, through employees. We've changed our ratio a little bit. We used to do a lot of contract services. We're starting now to make the switch, as the council approved in April. We'll talk about that a little bit more, of making the shift from contract employees to staff on hand. But when you combine and look at all of our expenditures, it climbs to about 67% when you factor in labor costs from contract employees and RSO contract services. So that's the majority of the budget is spent on either contract services, professional services, employees, and so forth. And then the remainder of the budget is everything that you know and understand, that we would have utilities and supplies and insurance costs and so forth. So it's kind of an interesting perspective on the city and how we're spending our dollars. So moving on to the one-time general fund expenditures that I referred to back on one of our earlier slides, we have about $350,000 in one-time costs. We have strategic planning and economic development coming through the city manager's office. The strategic planning, I think, was last done in 2020, right?
Yeah, and that's 5 years is usually the target for
Okay.
that, especially since we have, you know, I think only 2 of you were here on the council when we did our last strategic planning, so it's definitely due.
And then we have our legal attorney fees. There's just this continued variable, so we're looking about $85,000 of one time. Information technology, actually, Darlene had done some analysis. We're currently leasing our plotter, and she has made the recommendation and just come to the conclusion that economically we're better off acquiring this and owning it as opposed to the leasing costs. So that helps save us some money on leasing. And then we have 2 community development plans, the safety and AB 98 circulation study. There is a potential, there's a bill running through our legislature, the state legislature right now, to potentially extend the AB 98 circulation study and allow for that to possibly be included with our general plan update. So it's possible there might be some good news for us, that we might see some savings there, albeit it's one time and it would just be rolled over into the general plan, but it would be nice to see. And then we have our City of Calamesa's 35 years anniversary celebration, which is wonderful. I'm very proud of our city. So we've been established now 35 years, so we're looking to have $10,000 allocated for that. So that comprises the $350,000 of one-time costs that have been recommended thus far from staff. So one thing that was kind of striking for Will and I is, much like the city's in a lot of positions that we're all in with our homes, that there's a lot of outside forces dictating costs by which we have no control, right? You get your insurance bill. I suppose there's a variable that you can say, all right, we're going to have less coverage or what have you, but your insurance is what it is. Utility costs are what they are. And so we've noticed a trend with Calamasa that, just like what other people are experiencing, we have our own recurring general fund expenditures that are increasing. So in particular, I'm going to go with these in detail, but in summary, we have the police and sheriff's department. We don't get to negotiate and tell them, all right, we're going to go in for some hard negotiations and we want our increase to be this rate. This is a rate that's dictated and decided by the County of Riverside, and it's not arbitrary. It's through the actual cost of the sheriff's department, but there's no negotiating power for Calamasa. If we're in contract services, these are what the rates are. Risk management, our liability and workers' compensation. We have a wonderful insurance authority, and it's looking like we're having an increase of about $39,000 there. And then we have the wildland fire protection agreement, that if you have specific questions about that, we'll also see a slide on this, but this is the state telling us, hey, if you want this coverage, this is what it's going to cost. So there's a lot of increases for which we don't have a lot of dynamic control. So I'm going to turn it back over to Will, because he's going to go into some detail looking at some trends with respect to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department.
Thank you. So I think that I think there's a couple of things that stand out here. Obviously, if you look at the right side, the purple is the projected increases for this year, and then our budget for 26 and what we forecast for 27. The low increases, I think, that we saw in fiscal years 23 and 24 in particular probably were not sustainable. The sheriff's department, though, only passes on their costs, right? So they look at what their costs are, and even if they anticipate that they may need more, they're not going to pass an increase on larger than that they can justify at the time, anticipating that to kind of smooth it out, so to speak, right? So I think that this probably is you probably would have to go back farther. You know, if you look back in the mid 2010s, cities, there were some similar sharp increases, maybe not to this extent, but there were pretty sharp increases in the mid 2010s, and it did cause cities to start to look at alternatives. As a matter of fact, there was a study done to look at the possibility of forming a JPA. The city of Calamasa was a part of that research initially, but then we dropped out of it. But I think there was about 6 or 7 cities that participated in that altogether. Menifee being one of them, who now has their own police department. But the larger cities were probably the major focus. Moreno Valley and Temecula, those are the 2 largest contract cities with Riverside County. And they concluded that they actually were it was actually going to cost more to go in that direction. Obviously, if you're going to start your own police force, whether it's 1 city or 7 cities with a large department, the startup costs are pretty dramatic. And then there's obviously ongoing insurance costs. They also had to look at recruitment because this was in a post-PEPRA world. So most departments for classic employees, they get 3% at 50. And so if you're not able to offer that, it does probably create some, it could create hindrances to get, more senior staff. As time goes on, that's less of a factor. But at the time, Pepper was new, so the majority of your officers were still classic members. What that looks like today is a lot different than it did look 10 years ago. But nonetheless, those increases primarily back then were driven by pension costs. And these costs are driven by increases in salary. The deputies union did negotiate pretty dramatic increases because they found that they were pretty far behind in the market. And so they provided the increases over 3 years, and now what we're seeing these increases as a result is a major driver in those costs. As a matter of fact, about 86% can be attributed to salaries and benefits. So if you look how it applies to the city of Calimesa, you can see that jump from fiscal year 21 to 22. That's when we added the POP officer. So the current cost for the POP officer is $450,000 per year. We do have a one-time cost or shift in cost going to the supplemental law enforcement fund. And something to keep in mind too is that these costs do not include the cost of our full-time CSO, our community services officer. That cost is about $140,000. That cost is also accounted for in the supplemental law enforcement fund. So you can see over the last, if you look at from fiscal year 21 to 26, it's $1 million increase, but about half of that is attributed to, a little less than half of that is attributed to the addition of the POP officer. So the rest is just cost increases. So you're looking at over $500,000 in just the last 5 years or so. But when we look into the future, we're seeing, when we talk about 7%, then 9%, then 7%, that's going to probably be another roughly $500,000. So those are the things that we're looking out for in the future that do give us some pause in terms of things going forward. How do we fund these things going forward? And the sheriff's department contract is one of those that we're in a larger city that has a lot of resources going to them. There is some flexibility in terms of what they can cut. We're not really in a position to do that here, and so that does lead to some unique challenges that we have. So these are the increases on the sheriff's side. Do you have any questions on this particular category?
Quick question. Maybe this is for Captain Northrup. So, looking at the projections into the future, how likely are these to be accurate? In particular, the 7% projected, 2 years from now. Is that a pretty accurate projection?
So from all the conversations I've had, that's what we believe it'll be. The management unit is in labor negotiations now, so that might have some impact on how we see those things. But when we look at that 7%, that's trying to roughly estimate off of what the deputy union got to try to get to that number. So we believe it's pretty close.
Pretty close. When will that be solidified, you think?
They're in negotiations now. The actual contract they're in now doesn't end until December. However, there's some compaction issues, so they're looking at trying to get that solidified within the next month or so.
Okay.
But I don't really know how the negotiations are going at this point.
All right. No, thank you.
So just to clarify, so the increase of about $500,000 doesn't give us anything other than just more money in the pockets of the sheriff's department. Is that basically it?
Yeah, that's a way you could say it, yes.
Because we're not getting an extra deputy, or we're not getting nothing
Correct.
extra
Yeah,
for it.
the-
It's
the-
just to sustain the service that we have.
Yeah, the unit cost that we pay for the services that we already have is increasing, yes.
And so for the next, from 23 to 27, or from 25 to 27, so it's going to be about like almost a 24% increase.
Correct.
So if I can just add, so the department, or the sheriff's department, never, we don't overbill, right? So ultimately what we got to try to look at is when there's spikes, generally when there's spikes, that's all labor, okay? And that's what's going on here, it's labor. But keep in mind that that is a fully supported deputy sheriff, car, insurance, dispatch, SWAT teams, aviation, all the things that comes with a deputy sheriff. So as we move forward, as you move forward as a city, one of the things that you got to look at as contracts kind of go up and down, you got to look at, try to figure out where you can maybe make some cost savings to law enforcement in order to deal with future spikes, right? I believe that the RSA contract is 3 years, so it's going to be hard to say where this is going to taper off, if it tapers off at all. So in fiscal year 23, 24, when it was at 2.45%, we found that the rate of a deputy sheriff was well below the market value. And as a result of that, we had a hard time keeping staff. I think we hired 144 deputy sheriffs that year, and we had a total of 178 sworn leave. And it costs roughly $120,000 to hire and train a deputy sheriff. So you can imagine the loss there. So as a city, I just urge that as you start to see these trends go down, you figure out how to save that money, or how to look at spending that money to where you know that there's going to be a labor spike at some point. So, and again, it's about roughly 86% of that is labor.
Okay, thank you.
And I'd like to follow up as well. The average over all these years is about 5%, and we did do a historical trend. We looked at numbers going back to 2010, and on the average, it was a 5% increase. So in my mind, I thought, okay, as we said, start heading out into fiscal year 28, 29, 30, I'm dropping in numbers. I think you'll see it in another slide, about 4.5, 5.0, 5.5%, that they're going to be what they're going to be in the end, but on the average, it seems to be about a 5% increase.
I think when we do forecast budgeting going forward, to Captain Northrup's point, I think it would be prudent for us to, even if we know that the increase is going to be a bit lower, maybe budget for a higher number, and then set that, when we have the budget, quote unquote budget savings, set that money aside to kind of level out those spikes. So you've kind of a fun way to be able to kind of level those costs out. So that could be a strategy that we could use going forward.
That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you very much. I also wanted to let you know, in this $2.9 million, we do have about $100,000 that we've estimated and budgeted for the supplemental deputies when they have to come, when you need a 2-person deputy team come on the scene, and that is very much an estimated number. So if we had a high profile incident, that number would go much higher. So we do the best we can. So I mentioned throughout this whole presentation some degree of variability. So if we have a low key year and we don't have a lot of activity, that number may come in lower. But you can see how these numbers, again, going back to that structural surplus of 83,000, if we had a high impact incident, that could get wiped out pretty quickly if there were a lot of deputies and investigators required. God willing, that doesn't happen, but just something to keep in mind.
I do want to say too, I just want to voice my appreciation to both Captain Northrup and Celeste. They've talked about this a lot, and Captain Northrup keeps a very close eye on that stuff for us, and communicates it to us frequently. So he's been very, very helpful in that regard. So I appreciate both of your work on that.
I got a question.
Oh,
Just
certainly.
going back.
Oh, please, of course.
So Leslie, you make a good point, averaging 5% each year, and that kind of sounds about right with cost of living with the officers and stuff every year. There's potential between 2 to 4% increase on stuff, and of course with insurance going up as well too.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds about like an average of any other employer, but of course the sheriff's department is way much bigger because it's covering different cities within our county, correct?
It sure does sound consistent. I think you're right. Yeah, 5% feels like about the sweet spot. I totally agree. Would you like to share something?
No, that is correct. And in years past, I think my opinion is part of the issue is that there's been long-term negotiations with the deputy unions, 5-6 year agreements. So you see a spike and then you see this taper off to 1.6%, 2.4%, those type of things. And keep in mind the Sheriff's Department, we don't only have the management union, the deputy union, but we also have 2 other unions that the county negotiates with. And those are support services type of units. The community service officers fall under a different union than the deputy union. So, and then office staff is under a different union. So you will have some spikes or minor anomalies, but again, those are small because the percentage of employees are small.
If I may follow up real quick, Captain Northrup. So has there been any discussion about setting, this would be a very city-friendly policy, setting just an increase at a flat 5%? I know you mentioned that's hard to do because you only charge for real services, but in those years where it does spike, perhaps the Sheriff's Department could absorb that until the next year where it's less, right? And so it's just an average fee. Is there going to be talk of anything like that, or is it just always going to be these spikes and these low years, these high years, up and down?
Yeah, we're always going to bill with basically whatever it is the cost is, right? So we're not going to try to project out. That's something for the cities to try to work out.
I see. Okay.
If I may, I think that it's important to understand how the cost structure works too. So, for example, we know that the fiscal year 25 number came in at 7.03%. And the reason we know that is because they basically do a true up once their audit's done. Then there's a true up to the rate there's a projected rate, and then there's a true up to the actual rate. And so, to his point, that's where the actual cost comes from, because then there's a bill that basically comes in to bill for the difference. So, we had anticipated a 4% increase, so that's what was built into it, and that's what was built into the rate that they started with. Then they came with their actual cost, it was higher, so then there's a supplemental bill to pick up that actual cost, so then it matches up with actual costs.
Okay, thank you very much for your input on that, and thank you for your questions. Insurance. So, with respect to insurance, just as I mentioned before, we're all seeing it as we pay insurance for our homes and our properties, and I'm sure you saw the news recently that State Farm received a special appeal to charge an emergency increase rate. I think it was 15%, and it was 17. Thank you for clarifying that. So for the city of Calamasa, I combined, now this is fire and clerk and risk management, this is everything combined. I have the workers' comp trend and the liability and other trends. And you can see our insurance from fiscal year 21 in total increased from $235,000 to $503,000. What can we say about this? This is the state we happen to live in, this beautiful state of California, and there are consequences to all of these natural disasters, and costs are being passed along at many levels in our own homes, to cities. Will has mentioned before this to me, and I kind of agree with him, that I think sometimes people think that we're part of a government collective to the extent that we get special rates, and we don't have to, as a city, experience the same things that people do in their own homes. And you can see right here, the city of Calamasa, we haven't had a lot of significant growth, or Darlene, I don't think we've even had significant changes in insurance coverages, correct? I mean, nothing. Correct. Yeah, our coverages have stayed the same. It's just there's a recurring theme that we're having to pay more for the same, right? So this is a dramatic change from 2021. This almost doubled, and forgive me for belaboring this, but we're dealing with an 83% or $83,000 net surplus for ongoing costs. So you can see how these numbers just chip away at the net surplus that we have, that our dollars are just getting consumed more and more by these outside factors. So this was kind of an interesting chart that we wanted to share. You can see that the workers' compensation doesn't have the dramatic increase. This is nice. This is a reflection of our safety here at Calamasa. You know, it doesn't increase at the same rate, but boy, those liability rates sure are just really staggering how they increase. The wildland fire agreement, this is just because I think people understand context, and I'll invite Chief to give some perspective on this as well. But again, you can see 119,000 in 21, now we're at 178,000. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb for fiscal year 27 that we can probably expect to see another increase. Chief, is there anything you'd like to add about this or provide context for decision making?
Yeah, I'd like to add several things.
Please.
I actually have some answers. I think that I get the easy button. So if we take a look at fiscal year 21 at $119,000 was what we realized for the value of that contract. And I'm just going to talk about that value for just a second. What are we actually getting for this wildland fire protection agreement? And so understand that as a municipal city, we are responsible for LRA, local responsibility area, everything within our city boundaries. And that's rooftops, and that is watershed. That's our responsibility, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential, whether it's industrial. So your fire department has the ability as an all risk, all hazard, full service department to respond to those incidents. You also take a look at where we're located within what they call wildland urban interface at Intermix, and where we're located in the mouth of the San Gorgonio Pass and at the foothills of the San Bernardino National Forest. So we're surrounded by SRA, State Responsibility Area. And that 1 mile area between LRA, Local Responsibility Area, and SRA is called a Mutual Threat Zone. So everything within the city limits that, and if you remember, well, I'll lay it out. So JP Ranch, Singleton Heights. You can take a look at Calamasa Boulevard. You can take a look at the Summer Winds development areas. And we're in the WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface, or that intermix area. So there's a lot of watershed. Our city admires and adores open space concept. We're in that area, and we have wind patterns. So within that mutual threat zone, we have the ability to respond with a Type 1 fire engine. We have wildland engines, and we have limited staffing. So if we get a wildland fire event, this is basically an insurance policy, we automatically receive things that we don't have logistically. Rotary wing helicopter aircraft, fixed wing aircraft that has retardant capable deployments. You know, when they call it, you know, when they drop mud, when they sling that FOS check, we're talking several hundred thousands of dollars a tank full for one aircraft. We could easily deplete our reserve fund with just aircraft. So we get rotary wing, we get fixed wing, we get the benefit of extra engines, chief officers, dozers, bulldozers to cut line, and hand crews. So a little bit on the hand crews, because this will make sense more in a moment. So they're hand crews based on geopolitical, social occurrences. Used to be largely inmate hand crews in the state of California. We have transition in the state based on state legislation, and the lower inmate count, state and locally, we don't have those programs. We pay full-time firefighters now in the state on the state hand crews, and so we're paying those 20-person hand crews that were inmate labor. Now they're full-time FTE firefighters that we're paying for. So that, and the increase that we've seen in increased costs of apparatus, equipment, goods and services, we realize that through some of the increases here with the cost of those things that we get when we need them. We can't provide those things for ourselves on a continual basis, so it's prudent for us to have this wildland protection agreement. And every city and every city, incorporated city is on the same within the exception of a CAL FIRE contract county, and Los Angeles County and Orange County are those types of counties. This is prudent business. So here's the nugget. So 21 we saw $119,000. I'm sorry, 119,000. We dropped down to 111,000 in 2023. Why the reduction? So it's largely based on the number of acres burnt within the state of California that's factored in to the price per acre that it costs to fight those fires, and it's mitigated through price per acre, and then the subsequent cost of the unit price, the local ranger unit of, I think it's between 11 or 15% that they charge for their overhead cost to manage all of these programs. So when we have wet years, in the subsequent years, and we don't have fire activity, we don't realize a cost savings until the years after that. So my estimation, if we go back in 16, 17, 18, maybe 19, there was a reduction in the acres burnt, and we realized that savings in 23 is how it's been explained to me. So you can see the cost increase going up to what we have now. With the normal rate of inflation, we've had a significant historical number of acres burnt, so we're realizing, and that gets metered out to any wildland protection agreement user throughout the state of California. My counterpart in Yucaipa explains the same thing. He's having that conversation with his council and other staff members. This is money well spent, and hopefully I've given you the explanations of why the cost increase and what we're looking at.
Chief, if I may, if my memory serves me right, this wildland fire agreement came in especially handy in 2019 during our Sandalwood fire event. If you could maybe quickly speak to that to remind some of the council members and those
Yes.
who weren't on council.
Yep. So 2019, we experienced the Sandalwood fire. That was an LRA vehicle fire. We had a vehicle fire that was in that mutual threat zone. When we responded, it was reported as a commercial vehicle fire. It was a high dispatch day, so on a high dispatch day, we got additional chief officers. We got 5 additional engines. They started aircraft. Well, I'm sorry, they didn't start aircraft. We started to get that high dispatch, all of those extra resources, and when it jumped into the brush in that mutual threat zone, we started burning homes, and we had a loss of life. We had a significant increase in the resources that were automatically given, and that left us still with some expense because we're responsible for the rooftops within our city limits. But it was it's an amazing resource. I will tell you that today, in our deployment plan and as we continue to develop the fire department, because of the significant increase I'm talking about, and we'll talk about later tonight, perhaps, the increase in the call volume that we're seeing allows us to maintain our focus on what our primary responses are, and our deployment model will, we're going to hand off more to the state. We're paying for this. We are going to, in our command methodology and in our philosophy, if we have a fire in the canyon and there's nothing significantly threatened in the city, we're going to keep our resources in the city. The state's going to come in and handle that for us as we would with any other contract. And we'll reduce the amount of resources committed to that, and we'll take care of our local mission and our local citizenry.
Thank you, Chief, for that. So you can see the value of the services that we are receiving: insurance, police, fire. These are all really important, but nonetheless, they're numbers we have to contend with. So we have to be prepared for that. And as Chief so nicely and explained in detail, I'm already thinking we're going to be seeing what happened in this fiscal year, in fiscal year 29, would you say, right, on the average? So we have to think in terms of LA, that that's going to be get spread amongst our cities, then we probably have to be prepared in fiscal year 29 for a pretty significant increase. And would you say that this is the impact from the Paradise Fire, or is that still too recent? The 178,000?
I think it's everything that we've seen over the last 3 years. It seems to be, I know there was a few in Malibu.
That's right.
And I think it's my estimation that more of these costs go back to the increases that we've seen in the cost for logistics, and then their staffing models, salaries. Again, I think the two biggest thing is, and we've talked about it, you know, a $600,000 fire truck now is, you know, 1.2. We've taken a look at the hourly rates, where inmate labor, you know, 3 FTEs to manage a 20-person inmate hand crew. Now those 20 firefighters are, you know, their career full-time equivalencies at their base rate. We're going to realize that cost offset in this, and that's my estimation of what we're seeing, along with the significant number of acres burned.
Okay, thank you very much. So looking ahead, another element of major recurring general fund expenditures, the City Council did make the decision in April to, as I mentioned, to move from contract positions to full-time employees. So we made the shift on our Public Works Director, a senior building permit technician, the senior code enforcement officers, and all of these positions, ultimately, this decision resulted in a net savings to the city of approximately $75,000, and we realized additional service hours of about 1,600 additional service hours. So this was an important decision to make, and this has now been incorporated into the budget for fiscal year 26. And I do want to talk about, as we've spent a lot of time talking about increases, and so I know you're probably already doing some mental math and you're looking at, well, there's a lot of increases, what's happening, and so I'm so impressed with this staff and team here, because everyone really rolled up their sleeves to say, okay, how are we going to mitigate and offset? Where can we save? So we increased cost allocations out to special revenue funds. That was allowed in the cost allocation plan. We had a savings on emergency management contract services of about $45,000. We had a slight decrease in the fire department intern reserve program. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we're realizing about $75,000 of savings from the switch from professional services contract to employees. So we pulled together in the collective about $225,000 worth of savings to offset some of these increases for which we've laid out to you here. So we feel really good about that. You know, all of our department heads are wonderful advocates for their department, but within the city, under the leadership of Will, and of course, you all as the council, there is always the overall good for the city of Calimesa, and I think it's reflected in some of these decisions that we see here on these savings.
Celeste, I'd just like to thank you and the staff, for reminding us that $83,000, that sounds like a whole lot of money, is, I'm doing the math and deducting, and we're okay for next year, we're solid for next year, but 27 is going to be a real challenge year. So great work on the staff and doing the savings that they've done. It's really helped the budget overall, but I think we're bare bones. We're bare bones already, and yet we're not talking cutting services. We're not talking cutting staff, and so I think that's very commendable.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to this slide, thank you very much for those comments. We appreciate that. I had this question myself, and I thought, well, if I'm asking this question, somebody's going to ask this question. Where did the money go, right? So we look at fiscal year 21. We've seen, as Will explained, we had wonderful growth and development in property taxes and sales taxes. We did have a lot of growth. I had a sense, of course, I've been here since 21, but I pulled numbers together and I wanted to see it. So fiscal year 21, you can see we've had property tax increases since that time of 2.1 million. Sales tax increases, we've had increases of about 500,000. So altogether, we have revenue increases of 2.6 million. So I thought, where did the 2.6 million go? How did we spend the money? And here it came right out. It jumped right out the page. I picked up the expenditures from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 26. We had an increase in police of about 975,000. Half of that was for our POP officer, roughly about 445,000, I believe it is. The other half is the detail of that very large chart that you saw of the different patterns and growth increases. For fire, we went from about 2.1 million to 3.3 million, an increase of 1.2 million. And then, of course, our insurance, this is the non-fire portion because I didn't want to double count the insurance increases of about 150,000, so about 120,000. In the collective, that's about 90% of that 2.6 million. We put it right back into police and fire, which is consistent with another number that I referenced, which is in 21, we spent about 59% of our revenue on police and fire expenditures. I should say it's better characterized as that. And then here, we're also spending about 62% of our expenditures on police and fire. So it is following our trend, following our patterns. Chief can probably speak. I did some analysis and looking back on fire and the increases that we had. We made the switch to ALS, the Advanced Life Support Training. We have an additional BC. We increased our staffing model. We had at one time had 9 EMT positions. Now we have 6 paramedic positions, all for the greater good. These are all decisions that have been made by the council over the years. We have had some staffing hourly rate increases. I did a quick calculation because I thought it might come up. We had an increase of about 23% in the hourly rate since 21 for, I believe, our EMT position. So, and then of course the wildland fire agreement, which Chief very nicely shared with us all of the value benefit we get for that. So that's a general sense of how we've had increases. And then of course we have left about 275,000. I know for one position I'll offer, I told this to, this was also a time frame you all decided to hire a finance director. If you recall in 2021, your city manager was a city manager and a finance director. So Bonnie knew and understood she was going to be retiring and said, hey, we should probably hire a finance director now. And I was benefit of that, and I'm so pleased to be here. But I
One
thought,
of the
oh,
best
I'm
decisions she
included.
made. She made a lot of good decisions, but that was one of the best.
Aw, thank you. That's nice of you to say. So again, talking about how these dollars, they get, there was a lot of growth, but expenditures also happen as well. Chief, is there anything else you'd like to add about the fire and the trend? I think I captured it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So what are you paying and what are you receiving for that $1.2 million? And I think it's a fair question. Where do we come from? Where are we today? And I want to talk about service model levels. And when Riverside County canceled the contract, it was a 2.0 basic life support engine company. They added the third person on there based on the 2010 IAFF staffing model requiring a minimum of a 3.0 staffed engine. Riverside County forced for that extension for 6 months and then the subsequent extension of the contract, an ALS paramedic, and then sold it as increased service. You were not paying for that. They did that in that short extension time. So since 2021, what have we seen and what's been the methodology? So today, if you go back and take a look, Celeste talked about your full-time equivalencies. And the full-time equivalencies consisted of a fire captain who was responsible to supervise and drive the fire apparatus, and 2 firefighters, so 3 per shift. So doing the basic math, that's 9 FTEs divided by 3 shifts, so 3 a day. That was supplemented by, at the time, a reserve pool of 14. And the reserve program at that time was pretty robust. There were a lot of applicants. And then you had a deputy fire chief and a fire chief. So that's basic math of 11. And then they added an administrative assistant for fire. So 12. And today we're at 21. And so what we've gotten over the last 4 or 5 years is a 3-0 staffed, municipal staffed fire engine with a fire captain, a certified company officer, a fire apparatus engineer, a position that we added last year, and a firefighter paramedic. We added paramedic services. So I'll take a look back and tell you all the wonderful work that we've done. If you take a look at the increased growth from 2020, 2021, with I think we were at 1.4 to 3.2 or 3.3, the growth of your fire department has stayed within that 20%, that 20 cents on a dollar. We're within the budget of that fire fund, that historical fire fund, that fire tax base, and we've found a way to add paramedic services without asking for other increases and other mechanisms to pay for that. We've been able to pull that off to now. That's what you're getting. So now you're having a 3-0 staffed fire engine with that model, and a 2-0 staffed medic brush patrol. We have 6 FTEs, full-time equivalent positions, that were funded for paramedics. Puts 1 paramedic on the engine, 1 paramedic on the patrol, and we're subsequently staffing and trying to meet that staffing model so that we can reliably, consistently, and effectively make sure that we have a paramedic unit in the city, and that we also provide a like-in-kind service to our partners to the north, and it's open for our partners to the south should they ever decide to work with us. It's like-in-kind services meeting the industry standard. So that's the wonderful work in the budget that you can see in black and white that we've responsibly done over the last 5 years. Did I answer your question?
That was wonderful. Isn't he? He's so great off the cuff. I can't believe all the things he knows sometimes. Do you have any other questions about this or any other specifics you'd like to ask, or does this paint the picture?
You know, my eyes are so teary. It's not over the budget. I think we did a great job. I was in a sandstorm over the weekend, so excuse if I'm just blinking because I have sand in my eyes.
Oh my goodness.
But I know we had extensive discussion, our finance committee, so I'd like to open it up to those of you who weren't part of that discussion. Did you have some other comment you'd like to make?
No, I think Chief explained it very well, and I understand why we have the increase and what we're getting for that increase, and so, no, great job.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't have anything at this point. I don't have any questions. So I think everyone covered it very in depth, very thorough, and easy for me to understand. But I do appreciate this slide because I think if you're not in it over the last number of years and seeing it kind of play out step by step to kind of take a look back, because as you mentioned, things have grown and increased. So it's a very important question, where did that go? But to lay that out all in one slide there, I think that helps for those that are just kind of stepping in and looking at it for the first time.
Thank you so much. We do really want to be communicative with the community, and we're trying to answer questions before they're even asked. Like we're coming ready with information, so that's why this was important. And of course, Will and I talked about it, so yeah, it was very much with his ideas as well.
Edgar, did you have any other comments?
No, it's very straightforward.
Okay.
Transparency is clear, and you guys are doing great. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is really important as well, this slide, this specific slide, because we're talking about making some more effective and totally transparent changes and policies, especially when it comes to our community giving program. I know that's going to be probably considered a controversial move, but I think it's an effective move, it's a transparent move, and it allows probably more nonprofits to come forward and have an opportunity for us to help them. But it's also, it shows clearly that we're very prudent and we're very mindful of the taxpayers' dollars but we also want to be as supportive as we can with our
Absolutely.
community, so thank you.
Absolutely. So moving on, here's a summary of the general fund transfers out. We have about 33,000 going to the capital fund, 12,000 for the CDBG, ADA improvement funds. This is specific to the ADA accessibility in front of the library and around that area. The park diff fund, 11,000 is getting transferred there. Vehicle replacement fund of about 684,000, and information technology of 161,000. The vehicle replacement fund and information technology fund, again, those dollars are they're somewhat estimated because they're based on our projections, but that is in part based on our new fiscal reserve policy that was passed in September, that we always stay ahead of the game with respect to our funds in an attempt to anticipate and pre-fund our vehicle needs. Instead of us coming in 28 and saying, well, gosh, we need to replace this fund, we're developing a trend and a pattern and using an average of 5 years of anticipated costs and coming up with some ratios as dictated in the policy. So we're working on that for both vehicle replacement and technology. So I wanted to summarize again for you, now that you have all this information, all these numbers we've talked about, just look at this again one more time with the projected general fund. We're starting off with anticipated 7.4 million. The net change in fund balance before transfers of 246,000 and proposed transfers out of about 901,000. So we're going to have projected ending fund balance of about 6.7 million. We did want to talk about the capital improvement plan just as a really brief highlight because we've already dedicated, I think, a few hours to this. So this is the summary of the capital improvement highlights. That just as a reminder that the approvals that are being done for the capital improvement plan are only for the future fiscal year. You're not making approvals for fiscal years 27 through 30. It's just further, we have 22 carryover projects. We have proposed 80.1 million in investment over the next 5 years. For fiscal year 25-26, we have about 4.5. And many of these funds, we have to remind everyone that these are all funded primarily through grants or transfers from the general fund. Is there anything you'd like to add, Will, to this, maybe? Kind of fill in a little bit. And then here's an overview and highlight if you want to look at numbers and charts of what our numbers are. Again, I don't want to belabor it too much. We spent a lot of time talking about the CIP. And there's the spending fund sources if you wanted to reference that.
Just real quick, because you
Certainly.
look at $123 million, it's a lot of money. I'd just like to remind you, you have $102 million in transportation. A lot of that is going to be your Cherry Valley interchange.
So I'm going to turn it back over to our city manager for conclusion.
All right, thank you. So, starting with our available reserve. So Celeste had mentioned the new reserve policy that's going to be effective for the next fiscal year. And so it's important to remember that not all of the reserves are going to live in the general fund. So about 800,000 of it is going to be in funds 75 and 76 for vehicle replacement and IT replacement respectively. So when you're looking at your reserves, you want to look at all of those funds to get a full picture. You have another 160,000 actually in your capital projects fund as well. So, obviously most of them are in the general fund, and then we have reserves for parks and trails, which the council established 2 years ago, and then you have the mobile home rent control reserve, and that's a new number. It's always kind of sat there in the unreserved fund balance, but with the conversations we've been having lately and looking at the ordinance that we have in place for registration fees, we thought it was a good idea to go back and kind of track those revenues against any expenditures that have been spent on the program to make sure that we set that money aside for that use. Obviously, we anticipate that there may be some uses for that in the near future, so we wanted to make sure that we captured that and we have a funding source for those issues. So it does leave an unreserved fund balance of about just under $3.2 million. Again, this is kind of akin, if you looked at your own household finances, your contingency reserve is kind of like your savings account, the rainy day fund, so to speak. And then, you could even look at your unreserved fund balances. Part of that is almost like your retirement funds, right? So it's something that you're going to be using, for the future. And again, we do, if you recall during our capital projects discussion, there were a number of things that we're going to see in a couple of slides. There are going to be some uses for that already that we anticipate in the future. There are a number of capital projects that we have on the horizon, that 5-year capital program, that are going to be utilizing those funds. So everything's remaining equal. You already have kind of some idea, some roadmap of where that money is going to be used. So you got to be, those are when we make those one-time decisions, when people come to ask for us for money and things like that. You got to remember that there's kind of a plan that's laid out, and that plan shows where some of that money could potentially be used. Again, you're not appropriating it this time, but that 5-year CIP does give you that roadmap, an idea of what the kind of anticipation of that use of that funding is. So if we look into the future, there's 3 areas that we're looking at. So, as I mentioned before, we got our housing element passed, and in fiscal year 27, we're going to have to look at that again. And again, the requirements have become much more stringent. With each RENA cycle, we see that. So we anticipate that's going to be about $250,000, because that's something that we have to have a consultant help us out with. Also in fiscal year 27, we have PPE in the fire department that will need replacement. And it's really important. Chief and I just had this discussion today about NFPA standards and their relationship with OSHA. And so making sure that we keep up on these things is ever more important than it ever has been. Not to mention for the safety of our fire personnel. That's always at the top of mind for us. So with that in mind, that's what we're anticipating for PPE, to make sure that what the gear that they use is in tip-top shape. And then finally, the gold standard for general plan updates is 10 years. Very rarely do cities actually do 10 years, because a general plan update is a very, very long and arduous process. It takes a lot of time, and there's an environmental document that has to be associated with that. So we do anticipate, but our last update is in 2014, and our first general plan was adopted in 1994. Our first update to that was in 2014. So I'd like to try to get it done before the 20-year mark, and so we're anticipating that in fiscal year 2030 at this point. That's going to be another $250,000, could be more. Again, that's where some of those unreserved fund balances are going to come into play. But in addition to that, we've talked about some of these things already, especially the police increases on the last number. We've already kind of talked about that in detail. But we also have salary increases of 5% in fiscal year 27. We're not talking about cost of living adjustments. These are just merit increases. Most of our employees are not at top step. So that's kind of an anticipated cost that we have going into 27. Again, the $50,000 would be assuming a 10% increase, which actually would be a very welcome number, to be honest with you. So $50,000. I mean, if we're talking about a 10% being a good thing, that shows you the state that we're in. And then software annual and subscription costs. This is primarily related to our ERP that we're going to be implementing, and that was a necessary change. The ERP we're using is quite old, but we'll also have been told it's going to be discontinued anyway, so we have to change. But it's something that Celeste and I had kind of anticipated and planned for and wanted to do, because it'll help in the long run. It'll help us with financial reporting and transparency. So those are just some of the major things that we see coming in fiscal year 27. And again, normally we present kind of a projection, but as I mentioned before, trying to do a projection right now with kind of the wide range of where revenues could go is a little bit difficult to do. But we just wanted to highlight some of the increases that we anticipate coming on. We're already starting to look at how do we offset some of those. Can we offset all of them? No. But are there ways that we can do that? Yes, and we're already looking at that. So we're starting to plan ahead. Finally, I want to acknowledge a number of people for the preparation of this. First, I want to start with our finance team. Celeste and her team have done a great job with this. Celeste all these numbers, she's spent countless hours putting these together, scrutinizing the numbers, making sure that everything is accurate. And so my confidence level in these numbers is very, very high. And I want to acknowledge also behind me in the audience is our accountant, Alana Figueroa. The design is all her. And so we have a really good looking budget document. So thank you, Alana, for that. And then, Celeste said it before, but I'll reiterate. This is a team effort. This is really a group effort from all of our department heads and all the departments participating in this process. And in some cities that I've worked in, there's always this push to get more. We get 20, 30 budget requests for every department. And we're just not seeing that here. I always tell our departments, I need to know what you need. And I want to know what you want too. We want to know all of that stuff. And the requests are always very reasonable and rational and justified. Because they understand the environment that we operate in. So I really, really appreciate that takes real leadership to understand and be kind of on the same page where we are budget-wise. So I want to thank the entire team. You guys did an excellent, excellent job with this. And our administrative team are the ones that kind of put the document together. So I really appreciate their efforts in putting together a document for you guys to review. So again, it's just a good job all around for the entire team. So the next steps on this, obviously we're going to have a discussion. We want to get the council's feedback on things that are here, things that are not here perhaps. We will put those, anything that is requested that's kind of agreed upon by the council, we'll add it to this, make changes, and we'll bring that to you for your June 2nd meeting for adoption of the budget. So with that concludes our presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions and talk about anything that you want with the budget. Thank you.
I'll open it up to my colleagues. Okay.
I guess I'll go first. I'd like to echo what Will said to the staff. Thank you guys very much for your time and hard work, and it's very apparent with this document that we were going through these last few days, and just a wonderful job. And make it easy for somebody like me to be able to digest it and understand it, because I'm not a numbers guy per se, so I really appreciate that effort and the great work. As far as the budget goes, I think we've done a lot of good. The city has done a lot of good things putting a budget together for us. Is there any room for cost savings as it pertains to the sheriff's department? I know that the increases are what they are, but we have a CSO, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And so if we remove that position, knowing that the sheriff's department has an automated phone line, for non-suspect contact reports, would there be ability for us to save money there?
I believe so. I mean, if you just look at the position itself and the cost of it alone, I think Captain has maybe something to say about that. But I think that right now, if you look at the positions that we pay for directly, we have the 24/365 deputy, we have the POP officer, which is dedicated to us, and we have the CSO. Those are the three. The 24/7 365 deputy equates to about 4.647 FTEs,
Yeah.
and then each of the others are 1 FTE. So I don't know, maybe.
And I want to say and also that you guys do a great job. So my comments are not disparaging to the efforts that you guys put forth. I'm just looking at this, knowing that there's a call center that takes reports. If there's a way to maybe save some money, because it's going to go up whether we want it to or not, our contract is, and if we can kind of mitigate some of that with excluding that position.
So I understand the spike in cost. The community service officer is tasked with a whole bunch of different assignments. primarily, she works with traffic. She does parking enforcement, handles traffic collisions. She's a traffic reconstructionist, so if there was a major collision that occurred, we have the ability to call her out and have her help supplement deputy sheriffs with that investigation to include written documentation. So keeping her position, I think it's valuable at the dollar rate she's at, and with the work that the community service officer does, right? So with the rest of the positions, you're not going to have some of that parking enforcement, some of the even with the call center, right? You're not going to have a community service officer that can go out and tow cars, stand by for tows, deal with transporting inmates or suspects to jail, and that's all things that would tie up a deputy sheriff. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that, Captain, thank you. That's all I have.
I think just to touch on kind of what Eric's saying, but we were looking at a lot of those numbers in the past. I think before you were on the ad hoc and stuff, we're looking at all these different numbers. So as one consideration was what's the CSO do? What type of reports are they taking? Like, what are we getting out of the position? Just as far as trying to evaluate each different items that we're paying for. But I guess some of my concern is if we didn't have that one, it's the cheapest thing that we pay for with them. But how much of that is going to fall onto the one deputy that we have? So is that going to slow down their response time? Like, what if they're tied up on something that's less important, or but time consuming and something more significant that we want the deputy to respond to? So I guess that's my concern, because I had some of the same thoughts before when I had previously looked at it. Is I think for the cost, I'd rather keep that there, and just because we're so limited. Because I'm looking at, I'd like to add more if we could, as far as deputy hours to our contract. Given we're looking at now, I don't think that's an option right now, but looking toward the future when we have the revenues, I would like to be able to place hours when they're at their peak times where we might need additional deputies. But I'd like to keep the CSO there, just because I don't want that to slow down the little bit that we do have for the deputies. So that's just one concern. I just want to touch on that, because it is stuff I definitely was thinking as well and kind of evaluated. But that was the conclusion I came to when I had looked at those particular numbers. But yeah, it is fortunate to see the numbers climb, everything across the board, because we're thinking of how can we add to our services. How can we, because we're looking at how can we expand fire, how can we add to police, where are we going to be able to do that, and when are we going to be able to do that? And with all these other costs, even though revenues have come up, all these other costs have gone with it, and it's limiting our ability to add to those, I think, as we all would like to. We have done that over the years, as Fire Chief kind of explains how we've added to those positions and made them better, and police as well, incrementally. We've been able to do that, but I think we'd all want to do a little more of that, and we're just kind of not able to do that right at this time. But I think overall, I don't have any questions on it. I agree with kind of where we've landed, and I think everyone has explained each department of how we got to where we are and why we're here. So I agree with that, and just like to say, I would like to see us add and increase those services, but I don't want to do that at the detriment of our budget. So
Thank you.
that's why.
Baker?
No, just you're doing an amazing job, Captain. I know you built the structure for our city with the deputies and everyone involved. So continue with the great work, and as we grow, hopefully we get more officers for our city. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you to everybody. Just want to echo the appreciation for all the hard work that went in here. I want to say also thanks to my colleagues for the discussion on the CSO. That was helpful to hear both your perspectives on that. I also didn't know what a CSO did, so it's good to know that they serve an important purpose, and it sounds like they take some workload off of the deputy and free up some time for them to attend to more important calls. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, there is some the increase in the budget. Yeah, right? We all know going everywhere that prices have increased, so it's nothing we can do much about that. Some positives here I saw, of course, like always, strong reserves. It's roughly 66% reserve, 6.7 million in general fund reserve. That's awesome. Strong sign of our stewardship. I think that's some wise decisions have been made to have that reserve. So provides us with stability, flexibility, financial security as a city. So kudos, right, to the staff and so forth for that. Capital improvement program. Again, I'm looking here on page 147 and I see $80 million in the next 5 years going to capital improvements in the city, and only 2.7 of that million is coming out of our general fund. That's phenomenal. 70 million is coming from developers and grants. I'd like to see more of that, but that's awesome. And then also the strategic planning and economic development. These are just modest things, but I think that those are valuable contributions, right, to the thing for strategic planning and economic development services. Again, they show a commitment to the city's sound planning and development. So again, a lot of positives there. So I do want to bring up one thing. So I've been in correspondence with Will about the $75,000 that we have here, page 18, in our general fund that's set aside for parks and trails. If you remember, we approved that a few years ago. And talking with Will and the input he's received, that money could realistically be used to cover hiring a consultant, which I think would be valuable in helping us to update and expand our parks and trails master plan, maps, and our master plan, which, as John knows, being on the Parks and Trails Commission, is a bit dated. It needs to become a little bit more workable. It's good in spirit, but needs to be more complete. And so I think that having a more comprehensive Parks and Trails plan, map, fully functioning map system would serve our city well, help us to plan accordingly, right? Help us to utilize and connect our spaces, our trails throughout the city, but hopefully also into connecting cities as well. So I'm asking the city council to consider adding to the budget or using that $75,000 that's in the general fund to hire a consultant to explore that option. So I leave that for consideration, and that concludes my comments.
Thank you. I think considering the flavor of economics from Sacramento and DC, I think we're in a very good position to handle the challenges that we have coming. And we've had some challenges with our developments, and we have that also to deal with this next couple of years. But I think we're in a strong position. I would like to thank the staff as well. Hard work, very appreciative of what it means to the community that we're paying that careful attention to the money that we have and we're guarding. So very pleased. And I'd like to thank Mr. Zates for coming to our meeting today, and thank you for the public comment. We really need that and always look forward to that. Thank you for coming tonight, and I'll leave it up to you, Will.
All right, thank you. So I guess I want to get direction on Mayor Pro Tem Cervantes' request on the $75,000 to add that to the budget.
Would that have to be an agenda item that we would deal with, or no? Is it just
No, because all we're doing is if you get the feedback, because you approve the budget on June 2nd, so based on feedback we have here, we'll change this document. So we would add that to the document if the council concurred for your final adoption. And that's how you would adopt it.
Okay, thank you. I think, Jeff, I think your suggestion was sound, and I would support that.
I was just curious, Jeff, on that, this master plan, like, how does that work? What would they be evaluating in comparison to like the map that we have of trails with the general plan, and how would that like work together? Maybe for Will, yeah.
Yeah, so they would first start by looking at what we have, right? And then typically when you do a Parks and Trails master plan, it's to basically, you know, kind of match up. You know, you look at what your future development patterns are, what your parks needs are. Typically, it includes feedback from the public, so you would have like public workshops, things like that. You know, this would be something that I would anticipate that, you know, your commission would be would participate in. Probably, you know, the two of you as Parks and Recreation Committee also. And it's basically kind of a roadmap for how you would develop parks and trails within your city as you develop. And to meet, you know, because there's, you know, the Quimby Act, for example, that's what kind of defines the ability to do funding for development impact fees. And so there's a certain standard in statute that says you have a certain number of park acres per thousand residents. So you basically plan out, okay, where are you going to, you know, how are you going to build those parks? Where are they going to go? So it'll integrate, you know, things that are in our existing, like the you know, the specific plans, Summerwind, Mesa Verde, and then also looking at your potential infill projects and how parks may go into those as well. And so that's kind of what it would do, but it would start with your existing map. I think that you guys would agree that there's probably quite a few modifications that would need to be made to that, just because it's so old. It did go through quite a number of private properties, so it's probably not a feasible map anyway, but at least it gives you an idea of what that was there. But I think, you know, over time things have changed. So, you know, not only trails, but what kind of trails? You know, I think people think trails, some people think bike trails, some people think horse trails, right? So those aren't the same thing. And so that's the kind of thing, that the kind of feedback that we are going to seek from the public, from the council, from the commission, and that kind of gets inputted to kind of how, you know, creating the roadmap, so that when we're looking at, okay, what do we want to do for parks, boom, we have a document that kind of guides that process and what that looks like. So that's what I anticipate what that looks like.
Could I just also add that since we're doing this, that it might be a good idea to look at our commissions. Our city has grown, our demographics have changed, and it might be a good time for us also to look at the functions of the commissions and how it works with the staff and the staff time, and there's cost there. And so I think maybe we should also look at that and make sure that we're utilizing our commissioners in a positive way, but also making sure it's a functional way to work with staff in accomplishing the things that we have to accomplish, because time is money.
So you know, obviously, Mayor Pro Tem also mentioned the strategic plan, and I think that's probably where we're going to talk about that more holistically. And I think that doing that exercise also could be another kind of variable that we can add to doing the Parks and Trails master plan. So what I would anticipate is we would probably do the strategic plan first. That kind of sets the roadmap for the entire city. And then the Parks and Trails master plan is kind of a component of that, right? So it gives that consultant kind of a good starting point of, okay, this is the priorities of the community, this is the priorities of the council and the city. They can use that to then form what that's going to look like. So I think doing the kind of the holistic approach first, and then focusing in on the parks, is actually going to be a real good flow of how we build all of that.
Yeah, no, I'm in support of that. Yeah, that makes, yeah, we'll put that together. Yeah, it makes sense. I think, yes, I think that would, no, I think kind of some of the things we've talked about in the Parks and Trails, that'll kind of help kind of put everything together. We're kind of looking at things just piece by piece. So I think to have, yes, a overall clear vision or plan would be helpful.
And for me, I see the bigger picture. I do agree as well too, because that means that we could look into like the safety component too of cameras, and the fire department as well too, of how I like to kind of control if there's ever a fire spread, because now we have more control of weeds and stuff as well too. And I know we were talking about it for the Summer Winds communities already for cameras and stuff
Yes.
like that. So there's a trail. There's a trail right there. So that will definitely will be great for a starting point, and Will can probably touch more base on that.
Yeah, so maybe this can address Mr. Tate's comments too. I think when we're looking at what's at 4th Street Park right now, I think there's a couple of points of clarification. So the what's in the operating budget right now is kind of ongoing. It's been on the budget for a number of years because that park was built in 2015, and cameras were included at that time. There's still the existing cameras from that time, very old technology. It's certainly something that I wouldn't want to build upon. So I think that, again, this is one of those other areas that we're going to have to look at more holistically and look at today's technology, because I would not want to put, to be quite frank with the council, I would not want to put what we have at 4th Street out at Summerwind, because I just don't think it would serve the purpose we need it to serve. I think the better approach would be to identify something that we're going to be able to build upon holistically for all of our parks, and perhaps we can start with Summerwind and build it from there. And there are a number of there's a lot of great technology out there. AI has been adding another component to that that can really enhance security, but it comes with a cost, right? And I think that to Mr. Zates' point, some of that money that he referred to are for bond reserves and bond payments that are required for the facilities. It's very, very closely restricted in terms of what you can use for facility funds. So obviously we'd have to look at how much of that would actually truly be available for this kind of purchase if it can be used. But there certainly are maintenance funds, and we've talked with our bond consultant, and that would qualify as a qualifying cost, because it's to enhance security and maintain maintenance at the park. So that's certainly something we can look into. So Summerwind Park has the funding available to actually do some robust technology. The question is, do we need to make sure we right size it for what we want as a community and what's right for us? Because if we're going to use that as kind of our standard, we need to be able to afford it at all of our parks, right? So I don't want to put something that, if I can afford a Cadillac at Summerwind and buy the Cadillac, well, now can I afford a Cadillac at 4th Street Park? Can I afford a Cadillac at Creekside? Can I afford a Cadillac here at City Hall? That's a different question, right? Because it's a different funding source. So that's the kind of thing that, but we certainly, staff will look into that. And we will probably bring back a plan that will be able to accommodate all those parks. And when we look at cameras, I think the bigger question is not just about cameras, but what we'd refer to as we have cybersecurity. I refer to that as physical security. So not just cameras, but also locks on doors at the bathrooms, so we can automate locks, those kind of locks, so we can open and close the bathrooms at And one of the technologies we're looking at is really cool, because you can have like infrared inside the bathroom. So if the park, sometimes, if you have a homeless person and they know the park's lock and the bathroom's closed at a certain time, they'll sneak in 5 minutes before just so they can lock themselves in there, right? So they have some place to stay. Well, they have technology that if they sense somebody, it boom, sends an alert to the sheriff's department to go check it out, type of thing. So there's that technology, but again, that's expensive. So it's just a matter of, what's the right cost? What are we trying to prevent? What are the problems that we're trying to eliminate or at least reduce when we look at all that? So there's a lot of different factors you want to look at, and you want it to be something that's going to be scalable to all of our current parks as well as our future parks as well.
Well, I think the security also expands to the immediate surrounding park areas. I know at 4th Street Park, there's a business concern right next door. They've had overflow of issues from the park, people from the park. So, and the same thing with residents, at our other parks. And it's just a common issue. So it's something we have to think about as well.
Can I make a comment there? So I know that we talked about the 4th Street Park security cameras, and if I remember right, the quality's not very good on the video there because the technology's old. So it's the value of that service isn't necessarily in the video recordings, maybe it's in like the deterrents, like having
It's
the
the-
cameras up there?
Yeah,
so people
it's
see
in
it?
the deterrents, but there's also other things. So, for example, the gate is automated
Yeah.
on that same system. So, you know, that part still works, and so the gate automatically opens and closes. Again, that was something that was just built into the park. For Summerwind, we actually have a staff member, or not our staff member, but during the weekends, you know, we contract with Beaumont Cherry Valley Parks District to provide those services. And by the way, just since that we're on that subject, we have increased services out there from them to include the weekends for trash and bathroom cleaning. So, and that again is being paid for out of the CFD that funds that park.
So is there any, I don't know the legality, and this might actually be a little bit silly, but putting decoy or fake cameras up or something as a deterrent in the meantime? What's the can we do that?
No joke. Actually, we had this exact conversation in one of our staff meetings, and I think the conclusion we came to was, while that may work, the problem is as soon as all that footage is public record.
Right.
So the first time someone asks for that footage, we have to go, well, actually, the footage really doesn't exist. So it'd be kind of an awkward conversation. And so I think if we're gonna do it, we need to do it right. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. Yeah. But yeah, we did contemplate it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, and I want to echo that. Thank you so much for the support and your guys' team as well too for following up with that. And right away, and we were talking about it before even emails and text messages were coming in. But I do want to appreciate and thank the whole team for following up pretty quick on that. Thanks.
So are we good on direction?
Yep, I got my direction on the 75,000, and we will, you know, just even though we're not formally, even if we don't, I did increase the budget in the document here for Summerwind Park and the CFD by $100,000. The funding was available. Some of that, you know, there's some that's used for landscape maintenance, but this is for unanticipated things, you know, repairs, things like that, but also to at least have some seed money to look at some of these available technologies so that we do have budget money available if we go in that direction. So we could move on that pretty quick if, you know, we have something that works and that we feel comfortable recommending for council to approve. All we have to do is just bring it forward because the budget money is already there. So.
Okay, so if there's no further action, we'll adjourn this meeting to the meeting of May 19th later on, about an hour or so, and we'll see you all then. Thank you.